You wake up every morning and feel like you're running in place. Same alarm, same commute, same bills, same quiet anxiety humming in the background. You tell yourself you just need a little more money, a slightly higher salary, a better opportunity, and then things will finally start to work. But year after year, nothing really changes. And the reason it doesn't change has nothing to do with how hard you work or how smart you are. It has everything to do with the enemy you don't see yet. Impatience, comfort addiction, and the constant pressure to look like you're doing well even when you're not. Nobody warns you about how brutal building wealth actually is. Not the kind of wealth that buys freedom, not the kind that lets you breathe, but real wealth that changes the trajectory of your life. They sell you a fantasy where it's supposed to feel good, look impressive, and move fast. But the truth is uglier and quieter. The first $100,000 is a nightmare. It's slow in a way that messes with your head. It's thankless. There are no applause moments. No one congratulates you for driving the same car for 10 years, or for bringing lunch from home while your coworkers order takeout every day. No one throws you a party because you walked instead of drove, or because you skipped something small and harmless that everyone else says you deserve. That first stretch feels unfair because you're doing all the work and seeing none of the rewards. You're saying no when everyone else is saying yes. You're turning down things that look normal, reasonable, even earned. A dinner out. A weekend trip. A small upgrade that won't really matter. Except it does matter. It matters because every one of those small comforts is a vote for the life you have now instead of the life you say you want later. And most people never realize they're voting against themselves because the cost is invisible and delayed. You start to notice how uncomfortable it feels to live below your means. You walk while other people drive. Not because you can't afford gas, but because you've decided that your future is worth more than convenience. You eat simpler meals while everyone else treats food like entertainment. You say no to birthdays, nights out, impulse trips, and you can feel the social friction build. People start looking at you differently. They joke about how disciplined you are. They call you cheap. They ask why you don't just enjoy life a little more. And that's when the real test begins, because what they're really asking is why you're not playing the same game they are. You're not just fighting math. You're fighting culture. A culture that tells you comfort is the goal, that struggle means something is wrong, that if it hurts you must be doing it incorrectly. But building wealth hurts in the beginning because you are intentionally choosing discomfort now to avoid desperation later. Most people can't handle that idea. They don't want to be miserable on purpose. They want progress that feels good immediately. They want proof that they're winning right now. So they buy things that make them feel successful, even when those things quietly lock them into staying broke. You start to feel isolated in a way that's hard to explain. You're doing everything right, but it looks like you're falling behind. Friends upgrade apartments. Coworkers get new cars. People you know are posting vacations and celebrations and milestones, and you're over here counting dollars and optimizing habits and wondering if you're missing out on life. That doubt creeps in late at night when no one's watching. You ask yourself if you're being too extreme, too rigid, too serious. You wonder if maybe the advice about enjoying the moment is right, and you're the one who's wrong. This is where most people quit. Not because they can't save money, but because they can't handle the feeling of being out of sync with everyone else. Humans are wired for belonging, and building wealth early on feels like social exile. You look strange to your friends. You don't upgrade when you should. You don't celebrate the way others do. You don't chase the same markers of success. And for a long time you have nothing to show for it except discipline and a quiet sense that you're doing something different. What makes this phase so dangerous is that it feels like punishment with no payoff. The numbers move slowly, painfully slowly. You save and then an expense wipes it out. You make progress and inflation laughs at you. You stay consistent and nothing dramatic happens. This is where impatience becomes lethal. This is where comfort addiction whispers that you've earned a break, that one small exception won't matter, that you can always get serious later. Later is the lie that keeps people broke forever. The harsh reality is that wealth doesn't care how frustrated you are. It doesn't respond to effort alone. It responds to time, consistency, and sacrifice. And time is the one thing you can't rush. You can't skip this phase. You can't hack it. You can't shortcut it without paying for it later. The first $100,000 is hard not because the math is complicated, but because it requires you to become someone most people refuse to become. Someone who can tolerate boredom. Someone who can delay gratification. Someone who can look unsuccessful while quietly building something real. You start to realize that the real enemy isn't your income. It's the need to feel comfortable, validated, and entertained all the time. It's the urge to match your lifestyle to your paycheck instead of letting a gap exist. It's the pressure to prove that you're doing well instead of actually doing well. Every advertisement, every social feed, every casual conversation is nudging you toward spending now and worrying later. And if you don't consciously push back, you'll drift into the same patterns everyone else follows. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from doing the right thing without recognition. You feel it when you pack your lunch again, when you check your account and see progress that feels insignificant compared to the effort you've put in. When you hear someone say money doesn't matter while they swipe a card they haven't paid off in years. It's tempting to give up and join them. At least then you wouldn't feel alone. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something else starts to form. A new identity. You begin to trust yourself. You start to realize that you're not poor, you're just early. You understand that what you're building isn't visible yet, because foundations are buried underground. No one praises a foundation. No one takes pictures of it. But without it, nothing stands. You learn to see discomfort differently. It stops being a signal that something is wrong and starts becoming proof that something is working. Every time you say no, you're reinforcing a boundary. Every time you choose the boring option, you're buying yourself a little more future freedom. You don't feel rich. You don't look rich. But you're becoming resilient, and that matters more than you realize. The loneliness doesn't go away completely, but it changes. It becomes quieter. You stop explaining yourself. You stop needing approval. You realize that most people aren't judging you at all. They're just trying to justify their own choices. And that realization gives you space. Space to keep going when progress feels invisible. Space to keep building when motivation fades. There's a question that hangs over this entire phase, even if you don't say it out loud. What happens after the first 100,000? Why does everyone who understands money talk about it like a line you cross instead of just a number? You don't have the answer yet. And that uncertainty can be unsettling. You're trusting a process you can't fully see. You're betting years of your life on a promise that something changes on the other side. All you know for now is that this part is supposed to be hard. Supposed to feel unfair. It's supposed to test your patience and your ego and your need for comfort. This is where most people turn back, not because they fail, but because they decide the price is too high. They choose ease now and unknowingly choose struggle later. And then quietly, without fireworks or announcements, something shifts. The habits you built start to stack. The discipline compounds before the money does. You're no longer forcing yourself to do the right thing. It's just who you are now. You've endured the part that filters people out. You've learned to live with less without feeling deprived. You've proven to yourself that you can delay gratification longer than most. And this is where the real story is about to change. Because after you get to that first 100,000, everything changes. You finally start to understand that the first phase wasn't about money at all. It was about proving you could stay consistent when nothing exciting was happening. But now you run into a different wall, one that feels colder and more mathematical. This is where people start lying to themselves, because the truth here doesn't care about motivation, feelings, or fairness. It's just math, and it's math most people don't want to hear. Compounding is the engine behind wealth, but it's also the most misunderstood force in personal finance. People talk about it like it's magic, like you just invest a little money and time does the rest. What they leave out is that compounding is useless when there's nothing to compound. It doesn't save you early. It doesn't rescue you when you're inconsistent. It doesn't reward dabbling. Compounding only starts working after you've built a base large enough for growth to matter. Before that, it feels invisible, disappointing, and almost insulting. This is where frustration peaks. You've been disciplined. You've been patient. You've done what you were told. And yet the numbers don't move in a way that feels meaningful. You put money away month after month, and the growth looks laughable compared to the effort. Few dollars here. Few hundred there. It doesn't change your life. It doesn't change your stress level. It doesn't change how free you feel. And that's when doubt creeps back in and whispers that maybe this whole thing is overrated. But the math doesn't care about your doubt. At 10% annual returns, which is historically reasonable over long periods, $100,000 becomes $672,000 in 20 years without you adding another dollar. No side hustle. No genius moves. No lucky breaks. Just time doing its work. And that's the part that messes with people's heads. Not because the math is hard, but because it exposes how impatient most of us are. 20 years feels like forever when you're focused on how uncomfortable today feels. The brutal truth is that most people never reach the phase where compounding actually helps them. They interrupt it too early. They pull money out to buy something they want. They stop contributing when life gets busy. They chase a new strategy because the old one feels boring. Every interruption resets the clock. Every emotional decision sabotages the very force they're counting on to save them. They say they believe in compounding, but their behavior proves they don't trust it enough to leave it alone. This is where the psychological conflict becomes unbearable for a lot of people. On one side is comfort. Comfort wants you to enjoy your money now. Comfort tells you that you work hard and deserve to feel good. Comfort is loud, persuasive, and immediate. On the other side is discipline. Discipline is quiet. Discipline doesn't reward you today. Discipline asks you to give up things you can touch for outcomes you can't see yet. And every day you're forced to choose between feeling rich and becoming free. Feeling rich is easy. It's a purchase, a trip, a lifestyle upgrade, a moment where you can tell yourself you're doing well. Becoming free is harder. It requires restraint when no one is watching. It requires you to say no even when you technically could say yes. It requires you to delay gratification long enough that most people assume you're failing. And the longer this phase lasts, the more tempting it becomes to switch sides. You start to notice how many people around you confuse activity with progress. They're constantly moving money around, switching investments, chasing trends, selling when things dip, buying when things spike. It looks like effort, feels like control, but every move costs them fees, taxes, and loss compounding. They're busy, but they're not building. They're doing something, but they're not letting time do anything for them. Waiting is uncomfortable in a world that rewards action. Doing nothing feels lazy, even when it's the smartest move. Leaving money alone feels irresponsible when headlines are screaming about the next big thing. And yet, almost all of the real money ever made in markets came from people who were willing to wait longer than everyone else. Not because they were smarter, but because they weren't constantly interrupting themselves. This is why people say the first 100,000 is the hardest. Not because the saving is difficult, but because the waiting is. You're forced to confront your own impatience. You're forced to sit with the reality that meaningful change takes time. You can't rush compound interest any more than you can rush growing a tree. You can water it, protect it, and wait, or you can dig it up every month to check if it's growing and kill it in the process. And this is where the emotional anchor hits. The pain of discipline weighs ounces. It's light but persistent. It shows up every day in small ways. Skipping things, choosing boring options, resisting impulses. It doesn't crush you, but it's always there. The pain of regret weighs tons. It doesn't show up right away. It waits. It accumulates quietly. And then one day it lands on you all at once when you realize you're out of time and out of options. Most people choose the lighter pain now, and don't realize they're signing up for the heavier one later. They tell themselves they'll get serious eventually, that once they earn more they'll save more, that they'll make it up later. But compounding doesn't work retroactively. You can't go back and invest time you already wasted. Every year you delay isn't just a year lost. It's a year of growth you'll never get back. This is why the math feels cruel. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't sympathize. It doesn't care that life is hard or that things feel unfair. It just keeps moving forward, rewarding those who started early and stayed consistent, and punishing those who kept waiting for the perfect moment. And the worst part is that the punishment isn't obvious until it's too late. You start to see how many people sabotage themselves right before compounding would have kicked in. They get close but not close enough. They build a base but then they drain it for a lifestyle upgrade. They finally gain momentum, but then they panic during a downturn and pull out. They do the hard part then quit right before it gets easier. And because the benefits are delayed, they never realize how close they were. Ling is permission to quit. To say it's unrealistic and therefore not worth pursuing seriously. But that thought is exactly what keeps most people stuck. They focus on the size of the goal instead of the process that gets them there. They look at the mountain and ignore the fact that the climb happens one step at a time. They let the end point intimidate them into inaction. And that's how they stay exactly where they are. The rising tension here isn't about whether compounding works. It's about whether you can wait long enough for it to matter. It's about whether you can tolerate looking ordinary while doing something extraordinary under the surface. It's about whether you can accept that the boring path is the powerful one, even when everyone around you is chasing excitement. And hanging over all of it is the same uncomfortable question, one that refuses to go away, one that challenges your assumptions about what's possible for you, one that forces you to confront whether you're willing to play the long game or not. 100,000 sounds impossible on your salary, right? At some point the ideas stop being interesting and start becoming uncomfortable. This is the moment where philosophy isn't enough anymore. Knowing how money works doesn't change your life. Understanding compounding doesn't pay your bills. Awareness without action just turns into frustration. So this is where everything has to flip. Not in theory but in behavior. This is where the rules come in, and rules are uncomfortable because they remove flexibility. They force you to confront what you actually do, not what you believe. The first reversal is simple, but it feels almost offensive when you hear it. Pay yourself first. Not after the rent. Not after the car payment. Not after the credit card minimums, the subscriptions, the convenience spending, and the little rewards you give yourself for surviving the week. First. Before anyone else touches your money. Even before you feel ready. Especially before you feel ready. Most people do the exact opposite. They pay everyone else first and treat their future like an afterthought. Landlord gets paid. Bank gets paid. Credit card companies get paid. Streaming services get paid. Restaurants get paid. And then, if there's anything left, maybe they save a little. Usually there isn't. And then they say saving is impossible on their income. What they're really saying is that their future is the least important bill they have. This reversal messes with your head because it reframes saving from a luxury into an obligation. It's not something you do when things are going well. It's something you do because your future self depends on it. When you don't pay your rent, there are consequences. Notices. Fees. Eviction. When you don't pay your future self, nothing happens immediately. No alarms go off. No one calls you. So you tell yourself it's fine. But the penalty is real. It's just delayed. It shows up decades later when you have no options left. First, this brings guilt. You realize how long you've been neglecting yourself. How many times you chose convenience over security. That guilt can paralyze you if you let it. But if you sit with it long enough, it transforms into responsibility. You stop seeing saving as something you'll do someday, and start seeing it as non-negotiable. Even if it's $10. Even if it feels pointless. Because the amount isn't the point yet. The habit is. Every time you pay yourself first, you're training your brain to believe that your future matters. You're building an identity. You're no longer someone who hopes things work out. You're someone who takes care of their future on purpose. Over time, that responsibility turns into empowerment. You realize you're not waiting for permission anymore. You're not waiting for a raise or a break or better conditions. You're acting with what you have where you are. Once that shift happens, the way you see money starts to change. You stop asking, "Can I afford this?" and start asking, "What does this cost my future?" And that question leads directly into the second major reversal, identity. Rich people look poor. Poor people try to look rich. That sentence alone dismantles years of conditioning. You've been taught to associate visible consumption with success. Nice cars, designer clothes, big houses, expensive vacations. But most of that is performance, not wealth. It's money leaving, not money working. And the people performing the hardest are often the most fragile financially. You start noticing the performers everywhere. The neighbor with the luxury car but no savings. The influencer renting a lifestyle they can't sustain. The coworker who upgrades every time their income goes up and is somehow always stressed about money. Their lives look impressive from the outside. But behind the scenes they're trapped. Payments. Debt. Obligations. No margin. No freedom. Then there are the builders. They're quiet. They don't advertise their progress. They don't feel the need to prove anything. They drive unremarkable cars. They live in modest places even when they could afford more. They don't talk about money, and that's exactly why you don't notice them. Their wealth is invisible by design. It's working in the background while everyone else is busy performing. This is where identity reframing becomes critical. You have to decide which group you're in. Not later. Now. Are you trying to look successful, or are you trying to be free? Because you don't get both, at least not at the same time. Every dollar you spend to impress someone else is a dollar that can't buy you options later. Every upgrade you make to satisfy your ego tightens the leash on your future. This is uncomfortable because it requires you to let people misunderstand you. They'll assume you're behind. They'll think you're not ambitious. They'll project their own fears onto you. And you have to be okay with that. You have to get comfortable being underestimated. Because when no one expects you to have money, you don't feel pressure to spend it. As this identity shift settles in, the third turning point becomes unavoidable. Debt. Not all debt, but the kind that bleeds you quietly every month. Credit card debt is the most obvious example, and it's one of the most destructive. When you're paying 18% interest, you are mathematically guaranteed to lose. You cannot build wealth while someone else is extracting it from you at a compounding rate. This is negative compounding, and it works faster than positive compounding ever will. You're trying to climb up while something is pulling you down harder every month. No strategy can overcome that. No mindset can fix that. It's not about willpower. It's about arithmetic. You cannot get ahead paying 18%. Full stop. Debt feels normal because everyone has it. It's marketed as convenience, flexibility, a way to enjoy life now. But what it really does is steal your future time. You borrow happiness from tomorrow and then spend years paying it back with interest. And the longer you carry it, the less room you have to build anything meaningful. There's a simple rule here that offends a lot of people, which is usually a sign that it's true. If you can't pay cash, you can't afford it. There are exceptions, but they're narrow. A modest mortgage that replaces rent can make sense. Education that directly increases earning power can make sense if it's approached carefully. Everything else is suspect. Cars, gadgets, furniture, experiences financed on credit. These are lifestyle choices disguised as necessities. People push back hard against this rule because it forces them to confront trade-offs they'd rather ignore. They'll say it's impossible to live that way now. And they're right. It's impossible to live that way and maintain the lifestyle they think they deserve. That's the choice. Lifestyle now or freedom later. Pick one. There is no clever workaround. As you start cutting off debt and refusing to take on new obligations, something surprising happens. Your financial anxiety begins to drop even before your net worth increases. You feel lighter, less boxed in. Every payment you eliminate gives you a little more breathing room, and that breathing room becomes fuel. It gives you margin, and margin is where progress lives. These turning points stack. Paying yourself first changes your behavior. Stealth wealth changes your identity. Eliminating bad debt changes your trajectory. Together, they shift you from being reactive to being intentional. You're no longer responding to money as it comes and goes. You're directing it. This is where people around you start to diverge. Some double down on performance. They see you not upgrading and assume you're stuck. Others quietly start asking questions. Not out loud at first, but internally. And you don't need to convince anyone. The results will do that later. What matters now is that you've crossed a line. You're no longer just informed. You're no longer just motivated. You're operating by rules that most people refuse to follow. And those rules don't make life flashy. They make it stable, predictable, boring in the best possible way. This is the point where wealth stops being an abstract idea and starts becoming a consequence of your behavior. You're not hoping anymore. You're building. And once behavior changes, everything else becomes inevitable. At some point, after you've changed your behavior and stopped bleeding money in obvious ways, a different realization hits you. You're not drowning anymore, but you're also not moving as fast as you thought you would. You're doing the right things, yet the sense of being broke still lingers. That's when the uncomfortable truth starts to surface. For most people, the problem was never just income. It was never just debt. It was never just discipline. The real problem was that they never actually knew where their money was going. Money doesn't disappear. It just leaves quietly. Few dollars here. Few there. Small amounts that feel harmless in isolation but become devastating when repeated thousands of times. Most people live with the illusion that they're being responsible because they don't see the damage clearly. They feel broke, but they can't point to a single decision that caused it, so they assume the problem must be external. Low pay, bad luck, a tough economy. But the truth is much simpler and much harder to face. You don't have a money problem. You have a clarity problem. Ask someone where their money went last month, and they'll give you a vague answer. Bills. Groceries. Stuff. They don't know specifics because they've never looked closely. They rely on their feelings instead of facts. And feelings lie. Feelings tell you that a $6 coffee doesn't matter, that a subscription you barely notice is fine, that convenience is harmless. But money doesn't respond to feelings. It responds to patterns. The moment you start tracking every dollar, something changes. Not in your bank account at first, but in your awareness. You see the truth written down in black and white, and it's impossible to argue with it. The money didn't vanish. It leaked. And it leaked through habits you justified every day without thinking. Food delivery when you were tired. Small impulse buys when you were bored. Subscriptions you forgot existed. Target runs that turned into $50 for something you didn't need. This is why tracking feels threatening to people. It removes plausible deniability. You can't pretend anymore. You can't tell yourself you're basically good with money when the evidence says otherwise. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every unnecessary purchase becomes louder. Every waste feels heavier. You start feeling the cost before you swipe, not after. That discomfort is the point. Awareness creates friction, and friction creates change. Without it, you drift. With it, you choose. Most people avoid tracking because they're afraid of what they'll find. They'd rather stay confused and blame their salary than confront the truth about their behavior. Confusion is comfortable. Clarity demands action. Once the leaks are visible, another realization follows close behind. It's not just where the money goes. It's what happens when you interrupt the process you've worked so hard to build. Compounding has a rule that almost no one respects. Don't interrupt it unnecessarily. This rule sounds simple, but breaking it is one of the most common financial mistakes people make. When you pull money out of investments to buy something you want, you're not just spending that money. You're spending all the future growth that money would have created. You're not trading dollars for a product. You're trading decades of compounding for a moment of satisfaction. And because the future gains aren't visible, people treat that trade as if it's cheap. It isn't. You begin to notice how often excitement costs money. New strategies. Hot investments. Can't miss opportunities. They all require attention, action, and usually fees. Meanwhile, the boring approach requires almost nothing from you. You set it up, automate it, and let it run. It doesn't care how you feel. It doesn't need you to be motivated. It doesn't tempt you with constant decisions. It just compounds. This is where clarity deepens. You realize that complexity is often a disguise for extraction. If something requires a salesperson, a thick prospectus, and constant explanation, someone is usually getting paid very well to convince you it's a good idea. Simple systems are harder to sell because they don't feel impressive. They don't make anyone rich except the person using them over time. As you absorb this, another layer of leaks becomes visible. Time. Every time you tinker unnecessarily, you lose time. Every time you switch strategies, you reset progress. Every time you chase excitement, you delay freedom. The cost isn't just financial. It's psychological. Constant decision-making drains you. It creates stress. It keeps money at the center of your attention instead of quietly working in the background. The people who win long-term aren't obsessed with money. They've set up systems that don't require obsession. They don't talk about their portfolios daily. They don't watch markets constantly. They don't feel the need to act. They're patient because patience is built into their process, not because they're unusually disciplined. This is the point where you understand why so many people feel broke even when they earn decent money. Their income is fine. Their problem is leaks, interruptions, and excitement addiction. They earn, spend, interrupt, repeat, over and over. And then they wonder why nothing accumulates. Once you see this, it's impossible to go back to ignorance. You start noticing leaks everywhere. In yourself. In others. You hear people complain about money while making decisions that guarantee they'll stay stressed. You see friends chase returns while ignoring costs. You watch people sabotage compounding and call it being proactive. And the most uncomfortable part is realizing how long you did the same thing. How much time passed before you understood this. That regret can either crush you or sharpen you. If you handle it correctly, it becomes fuel. You stop trying to make money exciting. You stop trying to impress anyone. You stop mistaking activity for progress. Clarity changes how money feels. It becomes quieter, less emotional, less dramatic. You're no longer confused about why you feel stuck. You can see the cause and effect clearly. And once cause and effect are visible, you regain control. This is the phase where you stop feeling broke even before you're objectively wealthy. Not because your net worth exploded, but because the chaos is gone. The leaks are sealed. The interruptions are minimized. The system is boring, and boring is stable. Stable is calm. Calm is powerful. And that's the shift most people never make. They stay in the dark, blaming circumstances, chasing excitement, and interrupting progress. You're not there anymore. You can see the leaks. You know how compounding works and how easily it's destroyed. You understand why boring wins. From here on, the challenge isn't knowledge. It's emotional control. It's staying committed to a process that doesn't entertain you. It's choosing freedom over dopamine again and again, even when no one is watching. There comes a point where money stops being the main obstacle and emotion takes its place. This is the phase where most people sabotage themselves without realizing it, not because they don't know what to do, but because they can't control how they feel while doing it. You can have the right systems, the right rules, and the right plan, and still lose if you don't confront what's happening inside your head. This is the emotional peak of the entire journey, because this is where identity is either rebuilt or broken. Envy is usually the first enemy to surface. It shows up quietly, disguised as motivation. You see someone driving a nicer car, living in a better place, taking vacations you can't afford yet. First, it just stings a little. You tell yourself you're happy for them. But if you're honest, there's resentment underneath. A feeling that they're ahead and you're behind. A sense that life is unfair. And if you let that feeling sit unchecked, it poisons your decision-making. Comparison makes envy worse. You start measuring your progress against people you don't fully understand. You compare your chapter 3 to someone else's chapter 20. You see the highlight reel without seeing the debt, the stress, the obligations, the pressure behind it. You assume their success is real and yours is imaginary because yours isn't visible yet. And that assumption slowly erodes your patience. Self-pity enters next. It whispers that you're working harder than everyone else for less reward. That you're sacrificing more and enjoying life less. That maybe you deserve a break. That maybe you've been disciplined long enough, and it's time to treat yourself. Self-pity feels justified because it feeds on partial truths. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's unfair sometimes. Yes, progress is slow. But self-pity turns those facts into excuses, and excuses are dangerous because they feel reasonable. Impulse is the final blow. Impulse doesn't announce itself as sabotage. It presents itself as relief. A small purchase. A small indulgence. Something to take the edge off. Something to remind you that you're alive. And in isolation, each impulse seems harmless. But impulses don't exist in isolation. They form patterns. And patterns become outcomes. This is the emotional trap that keeps people stuck even when the math is on their side. They don't lose because they don't understand money. They lose because they can't sit with uncomfortable emotions without trying to escape them. They use spending to regulate how they feel. To soothe envy. To quiet comparison. To numb frustration. To prove to themselves and others that they're doing okay. The identity shift required here is profound. You have to stop measuring success by what people can see. You have to stop outsourcing your sense of worth to external validation. Visible success is seductive because it's immediate. People notice it. They comment on it. They acknowledge it. Financial peace is quiet. No one applauds calm. No one congratulates you for not being stressed about money. No one sees the freedom you're building when you choose restraint over display. Owning things feels powerful for a moment. Owning time feels powerful forever. But owning time doesn't photograph well. It doesn't fit neatly into a social feed. It doesn't get likes. It shows up as fewer obligations, fewer emergencies, fewer moments of panic. It shows up as the ability to say no without fear. To walk away from bad situations. To rest without guilt. To make decisions based on what you want, not what you owe. This is where the philosophy of stealth wealth becomes more than an idea. It becomes a shield. Quiet millionaires understand something most people never grasp. The less people know about your money, the more control you have over it. No logos. No flexing. No announcements. No performance. Just quiet accumulation. When no one expects you to spend, You don't feel pressure to prove anything. You start noticing how loud insecurity is. The people who talk the most about money usually have the least of it. The ones posting constantly about hustle, success, and luxury are often drowning behind the scenes. They need the performance because without it, they'd have to face the reality of their situation. Silence, on the other hand, usually signals confidence. People who are secure don't need to explain themselves. As you internalize this, something shifts in how you react to others. You stop feeling threatened by their success. You stop feeling behind. You stop assuming that what you see is the full story. You understand that many of the people you envy are trapped by the very things you're resisting. Big payments. High fixed costs. No margin. No exit. Their lives look impressive, but they're fragile. You also confront a hard truth about yourself. Some of the envy you feel isn't about money at all. It's about validation. It's about wanting your effort to be seen, wanting your discipline to be acknowledged, wanting proof that the sacrifice is worth it. Letting go of that desire is one of the hardest parts of building wealth. It requires you to accept that some of the most important work you'll ever do will never be celebrated publicly. This is where emotional maturity becomes a financial advantage. You learn to sit with discomfort without reacting. You notice envy without acting on it. You feel comparison without letting it drive your behavior. You experience impulse and choose restraint anyway. Not because you're denying yourself joy, but because you understand the trade you're making. The real flex is financial peace. Not worrying about a $300 emergency. Not feeling your chest tighten every time a bill arrives. Not needing to ask permission to take time off. Not being trapped in a job you hate because you're one paycheck away from disaster. That kind of peace doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It just exists steady and reliable. At the emotional peak of this journey, you realize that wealth is as much about subtraction as addition. Subtracting envy. Subtracting comparison. Subtracting the need to impress. Subtracting impulse-driven decisions. Each thing you remove makes the system stronger, lighter, more resilient. You stop chasing the feeling of being rich and start valuing the feeling of being calm. You stop trying to win visible races and focus on winning private ones. You accept that being underestimated is not a curse but an advantage. When expectations are low, pressure disappears. And when pressure disappears, discipline becomes easier to maintain. This is also where self-sabotage loses its power. Not because temptation disappears, but because you can see it clearly. You recognize the patterns before they take over. You understand that every impulsive decision is usually an emotional response, not a rational one. And once you separate emotion from action, you regain control. Most people never reach this point. They spend their lives oscillating between envy and indulgence, comparison and impulse, never understanding why money feels so heavy. They think the solution is more income, more excitement, more stuff. But the real solution is internal. It's learning to be content building quietly, while the world performs loudly. By the time you reach this emotional peak, your relationship with money has changed fundamentally. It's no longer about proving anything. It's about protecting your future. It's about preserving your time. It's about choosing peace over noise, freedom over approval, and patience over impulse. And once that identity locks in, it becomes very difficult to go back. By the time you reach this stage, motivation is no longer the problem. You don't need another speech, another burst of inspiration, or another promise to yourself that this time will be different. Motivation is unreliable. It fades when you're tired, stressed, bored, or overwhelmed. If wealth depended on motivation, almost no one would ever build it. What actually works is control. Quiet, structural control that operates whether you feel like it or not. This is where the long game becomes real. You stop trying to outdiscipline your impulses and start designing a life where impulse has less power. You accept a hard truth that most people resist for years. You cannot rely on willpower in a world engineered to drain it. Every app, every advertisement, every one-click purchase is designed to exploit your weakest moments. Trying to win that battle through sheer discipline is like trying to hold back the ocean with your hands. Eventually you'll get tired. So instead of fighting yourself, you outsmart yourself. You build systems that make the right decision automatic and the wrong decision inconvenient. You remove friction from saving and investing, and you add friction to spending. You stop asking yourself to be strong all the time and start creating an environment where strength isn't required as often. Automation becomes the backbone of everything. Not because you're lazy, but because automation is consistent. It doesn't care how you feel. It doesn't get distracted. It doesn't negotiate. When money moves automatically, it keeps moving whether you're motivated or not. This is how people build wealth quietly while living normal lives. They're not thinking about money constantly. Their systems are doing the thinking for them. A simple structure is often enough. A separate savings account at a completely different bank. No debit card. No easy access. No app on your phone. Just a digital vault. Out of sight, out of mind. Every time you get paid, an automatic transfer moves money there before you can touch it. Even if it's $25. Especially if it feels too small to matter. Because consistency matters more than size. This one move alone changes behavior dramatically. You're no longer deciding whether to save. It's already done. You're no longer relying on self-control at the end of the month. The money is gone before you can spend it. Over time, this creates accidental progress. You look up after a year and realize you've saved more than you ever thought possible. Not because you were heroic, but because you removed temptation. The same principle applies everywhere else. Retirement contributions automated. Investment deposits automated. Bill payments automated. The fewer decisions you have to make, the fewer chances you have to sabotage yourself. This isn't about becoming a full-time money manager. It's about building a machine that runs quietly in the background while you live your life. This is where the illusion of dramatic change finally breaks. Wealth is not built through one bold move. It's built through thousands of boring ones. Small decisions repeated daily, weekly, monthly for years. No single action feels significant. That's why most people dismiss them. But stacked together, they become unstoppable. It's not intelligence that separates people who build wealth from those who don't. Plenty of smart people are broke. It's not luck. Plenty of lucky breaks are wasted. It's not income. Plenty of high earners live paycheck to paycheck. The difference is behavior, sustained over time, supported by systems that don't depend on mood or energy. At some point, you realize that the system itself is the reward. The calm that comes from knowing your future is being handled automatically. The relief of not having to constantly think about money. The confidence that grows when emergencies stop feeling catastrophic. This is control. Not flashy control. Not impressive control. Quiet control. And then comes the final choice. The one that has always been there, whether you acknowledged it or not. Discipline now or regret later. Discomfort now or desperation later. Patience now or panic later. You don't get to avoid pain entirely. You only get to choose when and how you experience it. Most people keep waiting. Waiting for more money. Waiting for the perfect time. Waiting for things to calm down. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for motivation. Waiting for someone to show them the exact right move. And while they wait, time keeps moving. Compounding keeps passing them by. Opportunities quietly expire. Starting doesn't require confidence. It requires action. Small, boring, unglamorous action. Save $50. Not because it will change your life today, but because it changes your identity. Track your spending for 1 week. Not forever. Just long enough to see the truth. Cut one unnecessary subscription. Not all of them. Just one. Read one book about money. Not 10. Just one. Automate one transfer. Set it and forget it. These steps feel almost insulting in their simplicity. That's why they work. They don't overwhelm you. They don't require a dramatic personality shift. They just require you to stop waiting and start acting with what you already have. The people who build wealth aren't special. They're not more disciplined at the beginning. They're not more motivated. They simply did the work on days they didn't feel like it, and then they built systems so they didn't have to rely on feeling like it forever. They saved when they wanted to spend. They learned when they wanted to relax. They delayed gratification while everyone around them indulged. Years later, the results looked dramatic, but the process never was. It was quiet, repetitive, often boring, and that's why it worked. You already know what you should do. You've known for a long time. The information isn't missing. The only thing left is the decision to stop postponing your future for the sake of your comfort. To accept that the perfect time isn't coming. To accept that progress starts messy and slow. Every year you wait is a year of compound growth you'll never recover. It's another year closer to the end with fewer options. Another year of paying interest instead of earning it. The difference between starting now and starting 10 years from now isn't just time. It's freedom versus dependency. You don't need to overhaul your life overnight. You need to stop sabotaging it gradually. You need to make the next right decision, then the next one, and let time do what time does best. Build quietly. Compound relentlessly. Remove drama. Trust systems over emotion. And if you're honest with yourself, you already know which path you're on. You already know which pain you're choosing.